So the extension of the shelter in place, or frankly, I would call it forcibly imprisoning people in their homes against all their constitutional rights, that's my opinion, and breaking people's freedoms in ways that are horrible and wrong, and not why people came to America or built this country. What the fuck? Excuse me. People, the outrage, it's an outrage. But it will cause great harm, not just to Tesla, but to many companies. And while Tesla will weather the storm, there are many small companies that will not. And all people's, everything people have worked for their whole life is being destroyed in real time. And we're going to have many suppliers, and are having many suppliers that are having super hard times, especially the small ones. And it's causing a lot of strife to a lot of people. I think the people are going to be very angry about this, and are very angry. It's like if somebody wants to stay in their house, that's great. They should be allowed to stay in their house, and they should not be compelled to leave. But to say that they cannot leave their house, and they will be arrested if they do, this is fascist. This is not democratic. This is not freedom. Give people back their goddamn freedom.
It's really exciting to see so many young people excited about the libertarian ideas that we've been fighting for so many decades. I think it still is very much of an uphill battle to make the U.S. into a more libertarian country, but I'm a lot more hopeful about the prospects today than I've been in quite some time. I grew up in the late 70s, 80s, at a time when there was a specter of communism, totalitarianism, and in some sense libertarianism was the opposite of a totalitarian state, it was sort of in part shaped by the problem of totalitarianism, the challenge of totalitarianism, and this idea that we needed to push in the direction of having less power, because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I started an independent student newspaper called the Stanford Review. It was a sort of libertarian paper where we challenged a lot of the campus taboos, asked a lot of tough questions around the speech code controversy, a number of the other things like this, and tried to really create some space for some dissenting voices in an atmosphere of political correctness. And I think the problem of political correctness remains our greatest political problem, and the challenge is to get people to think independently and to come to their own conclusions and not simply accept the dictates that have been handed down to them. You know, running a libertarian newspaper was an incredible experience as a manager. You sort of had to deal with some very stubborn, headstrong, talented people, and I think that prepared me well for any challenge that you might encounter in business. Don't accept education as an end in itself, as a guarantee. Just because you get a credential that's has the imprimatur of a university or society on it, that's not, what's really going to drive your success. It's really up to you, and you're really at the beginning of your life, and you have to chart your own path. And I think that's more true in our world than it has been for a very long time. You are the entrepreneur of your life, and you can decide, what you're going to do, what you're going to prioritize, and you should never forget that you have a tremendous amount of freedom as it is to make these very basic decisions on what you're going to do with your life, and you can start anytime you want.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Sides. And I think one of the reasons why you have an opinion is you understand the other side's argument. Our view is that we built the company to hunt terrorists, to make our society safer, both in terms of fighting terrorism and protecting data. If you are at Palantir, you have joined Palantir because you believe having a society that has less crime, less terrorism, and works better on all questions that regard safety, including data protection, is of integral importance. So that's the Palantir answer. The reason why I'm also on top of that very critical of the Silicon Valley approach is that what made Silicon Valley historically strong is Silicon Valley had a tacit and overt supportive relationship to the U.S. economy and U.S. defense from the beginning. The reason why people put up with crazy looking people that are doing their thing in a different way is because we have historically delivered either jobs or national security in Silicon Valley. People understood the value of what we're doing. Now Silicon Valley is creating micro communities that break the consensus of larger society, while simultaneously telling the average American, I will not support your defense needs, and then selling their products to countries that are adversarial to America. That is a loser position. It is not intelligible. It is not intelligible to the average person. It's academically not sustainable. And I am very happy that we're not on that side of the debate. Of course, been cautioned to be more diplomatic about this in public, but I view it as borderline craven. And again, if you're going to take that position, then you have to be frontal about articulating to the American people, what is it that we're offering you that you have in your life that makes your life better? Is it that you get to be part of an ever smaller community where everyone agrees with you? Okay, maybe that's what they're offering you. Is it that their standard of living is increasing? Well, then that argument has to be made. Because if you don't make that argument, and you then simultaneously say, I am not going to support a man and woman, American male or female, or a Western ally who is now in harm's way to come home, or I'm not going to stop a terror attack, the average person is going to think you have fallen on your head. And only someone with a super high IQ living in the micro community that Silicon Valley's created could come up with the idea that that is a plausible argument.
Do you really believe, though, if Google and Amazon and Facebook and others were more supportive of working with the U.S. government, more overtly supportive of working with the U.S. government, that the public would be more supportive around issues of privacy, around issues around the election,
I think
potential interference and things like that?
You can say, again, to your point, do I understand the other side? The other side would have to be, we don't work with the U.S. government because of principles, but this is the value we're offering to American society. If the argument is, we don't work with the U.S. government because our micro community calls into question the safety and security of American citizens, and we do work with adversaries of America, and we're not offering something that's clearly valuable to the American public. So to answer your question directly, they could say, look, we disagree with Karp, we think he's crazy, we disagree with Palantir, we have a principled reason why we cannot help the Navy SEAL come home safely tomorrow, the Marine come home safely. We have a principled reason why that's wrong. And that's why we're so heavily investing in making sure tomorrow you'll have a job. But the argument they're making is, you're not going to have a job tomorrow. And we're not bringing you home safely. And we're going to help you create a community where everyone agrees with you, but you can't talk to anyone else. Of course people push back on that. And by the way, we're a global business. You should hear how people push back about that in German and French. It's not just America. The whole world cannot it's not a sustainable argument. Again, the sustainable argument could be, we're going to help beat cancer. But according to us, we have this weird way of thinking, the Marine isn't the person that we revere like Karp does.
That begs the question, I think, because you just mentioned Palantir and SpaceX. Certainly SpaceX is changing the way that rockets are flown. Has it created, or have these companies created a template for other startups to follow within the space?
Well, there's certainly proof that it can be done. It in both cases took a wickedly long time, probably close to a decade, to start getting significant contracts from the U.S. military, and in some ways they were not conventionally venture fundable. I personally funded Palantir. Elon personally funded SpaceX. We got outside capital maybe six years in to both businesses. And so if you have something where you have a 6-year gap and it can only get funded by someone who's putting in tens of millions of dollars as a sort of slightly quixotic project, that's a tricky template to repeat. So I think there definitely are lessons one can learn from Palantir and SpaceX. We made a lot of mistakes. There may be ways to sort of develop these things more quickly, to procure things somewhat faster. But if you have a decade-long process, that's we're supposed to have long time horizons, but the time horizons are not that long.
The one thing I will add that I think is a tremendous testament to both those companies and Anduril and others that are fast growing and now have momentum is the people that are attracted to high growth, really big historic narratives. And so if you think about the flow of talent, the flow of human capital, the flow of financial capital, they don't want to go into these, small hot dog stands or these $30 million businesses. But when you see people voting with their feet, and I in no way mean to offend any of the primes who do incredible work, but many of the top engineers are saying, I don't want to go to, for example, Lockheed, which is, one of my investors. They want to go to some of these high growth early companies where they see the opportunity to create, a fortune in the future as much more attractive.
Because it seems to me that if I was taking the people that I wanted to be the most creative, the most outside the box, the most to look at the system and go, how do we fix the system from the outside, you'd want a lot of libertarian thinkers. That's the way I would at least look at it. So you'd think that everyone in Silicon Valley would be pretty libertarian. They want to do things on their own. And yet somehow in those 20 years, it became the opposite.
Well, it's like, when you ask the question, why is it so left wing? I think these things are, they're somewhat overdetermined. So I would say, part of it is that it's probably the most educated part of the country in terms of how much time people spent in college. And I think one of the downsides of too much education is that you get the most brainwashed. And so it's the most educated can also mean that it is the most brainwashed. This is perhaps not so true of the founders, but certainly of many of the rank and file people who are, if you're sort of like a really good engineer or really good at some specific thing, your education typically does not involve you thinking that much about politics. And so it's not necessarily from deep ideological conviction. It's often more as a fashion statement than as a question of power. And so one of the things that's always a little bit hard to score is that even though if you took a survey in Silicon Valley, it comes out as quite far to the left, weirdly uniform, weird sort of groupthink. It's super hard to know whether people really believe this or whether they're just going along. And so I think it's pretty liberal, but of course not as liberal as it looks, and that's in a way worse because it means people are too scared to articulate things.